Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Fried Maxick, now part of B.L.O.O.M, a national advisory and public accounting firm. The local team continues its decades-long commitment to serving Western New York with advisory, tax, and assurance services. More at withom.com.
For WXXI, this is Connections. Filling in for Evan Dawson, I'm Gino Fanelli. Today's connection was made a little over 5 years ago when then-Governor Andrew Cuomo signed the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act into law. That law legalized recreational cannabis in New York and set the groundwork for a multi-billion-dollar industry in the state. It also did something no other state had, placed equity at the forefront. While other states had made promises to ensure the people most harmed by prohibition, namely people of color and those from heavily policed communities, had a seat at the table, New York set out with an eye towards an industry run by people who were from those communities. Most notably, it set out for people who had previously been criminally charged under former marijuana laws to get a first crack at the industry. So today, we're joined by the leaders of B.L.O.O.M, a nonprofit cannabis incubator here in Rochester, to discuss how that effort is going, what still needs to be done, and, some of the ideas that can kind of get us to the goal of this equity that we set out for. So on the phone, we have Precious Brown, president of B.L.O.O.M. Precious, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having us. Thank you so much.
And we will be having Chad Anderson, vice president of B.L.O.O.M, in the studio. We're waiting for him. He just walked in the door. So we are joined by Chad Anderson, vice president of B.L.O.O.M, to talk more about some of these things. And I'll let you get situated and get your headphones on. We can get started here.
Beautiful.
So before we get into some of the details of the law, the industry, all of that, and some of the things that need to be worked on to make sure we have a really vibrant cannabis industry here, I wanted to give you both the chance to kind of walk through your path into the cannabis industry and what led you to doing this work.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Precious, you can go first.
Yeah. So, we talked about this before, Gino. I consider myself a plant pioneer. I've been doing this for well over 25 years. When I say doing this in the cannabis industry, in distribution and logistics in the dominated market at that time. And then as we came out of prohibition, now just being more of a resource to our community, ensuring that individuals that see themselves in the industry and wanting to own and operate a license within the regulated market, we created a non-for-profit organization to ensure that those possibilities are there.
And Chad, how about you? What led you into this industry and the work you're doing now?
Absolutely. First of all, I do want to apologize for my tardiness.
No, you're fine.
I get going, but just like Precious said, we had the conversation before. And just like I told you, as for me, it was about the accessibility. Right after college, I was with a friend of mine. We were going to get our dispensary license, figured out that was kind of out of reach as far as the card program went back in 2021, let's say. So then we kind of transferred over to the consulting side, having done all the research, known all the information, met a lot of the people to be able to, once again, help the accessibility for what that looks like, other entrepreneurs to be able to be in the shoes that we wanted to fill. And then, like Precious said, from then kind of, expanded to a lot of different projects, things like B.L.O.O.M, highly efficient waste management, and so on and so forth, that kind of really helps solidify what we're doing in the, not only the city of Rochester cannabis industry, but also just the New York State adult use cannabis industry.
So kind of, I mentioned the top of the hour, New York State, when it legalized recreational cannabis, it was really put into forefront something that no other state had done.
Right.
That it was really, really focused on this undoing the past harms of criminalization. Absolutely. And, making sure that we had an equitable industry that was run by the people that had already, been in the cannabis industry well before legalization. That was a rocky start. If we can be honest about it, that when those original card licenses were being rolled out, there were several lawsuits that kind of jammed up the works of getting the industry up to where it's supposed to be.
And I would even say, in the Finger Lakes region specifically as well. Rochester's, saw a detrimental hit just as far as what progression actually looked like. Precious, definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but we didn't see our first dispensary, comparative to other cities like Buffalo and Syracuse until 8 to 9 months after everybody else had already had their their first ones going. So that was definitely tough for us.
I mean, to that point, Chad, we had to wait an additional 2 years
Right.
to come out of prohibition, the finger licks regions, because of, the lawsuits that were, heavily hit within our region. Absolutely.
And for listeners who don't know, this lawsuit, that was the Verasite lawsuit. That was I believe, a Michigan-based company that wanted to open up in New York. They had done this similarly in California. They kind of have gone around and gone state by state to challenge these provisions, that it was essentially discrimination for them not to be able to operate in New York. When that lawsuit was being settled, it opened up region by region across the state. The Finger Lakes region, where Rochester is, was the last, last to get open. And on that note, too, I mean, I've worked with quite a good amount of dispensary owners that were trying to get their doors open during this time, and then kind of the years that followed as the trickle of openings happened. And I want to get a sense from both of you of what kind of effect you think this had on people that were trying to open their doors at that point in time, and did it weed anyone out? No pun intended, but did it weed anyone out of the market by having to wait that long to actually open their doors?
Right. I think
that's a great question. I think, Chad, I don't know. You can go first.
Yeah. I would just say, I think it was still early enough in the market that the glimmer of hope was strong enough that personally, I don't know of anybody that is specifically weeded out, because, let's just kind of think about where we are in the landscape also at this point is, like we said, cannabis was just legalized. It's a lot of card applicants who, gratefully that they were able to get actually their final license. So, when it was like, okay, now things are on a hold in terms of what it looks like to actually bring your license to operationability, I think that the threshold for patience was a lot longer at that point. Because like I said, this was a dream come true for a lot of these operators. So it was like, I mean, if I had to wait 5 years, I would wait 5 years compared to the, year and a half, 2 of them that a lot of them had to actually wait. I think that it was sustainable at that point specifically. That's why I kind of prefaced that with, the industry was still very young. It was still very new, fresh, and exciting. And I think that potentially they would have even waited a little bit longer. But, now that's obviously probably a completely different story given some of the, just trials and tribulations that we've been put through. But also, definitely curious what Precious would have to say about that as well.
Yeah, Precious, I would like to hear your thoughts on this too. I mean, what effect do you think it had for people that were in that early stages of the market as everything was kind of still getting legally figured out?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely don't think that, to Chad's point, it weeded anyone out as far as owner operator, but it was definitely a situation for individuals who had applied, right, and really sees themselves as a contender within the market, wanting to operate, whatever license that they're applying for, making sure that they're prepared. It was really frustrating to the individuals, right? Mm-hmm. Having to, go through and wait for the time period that they had to wait. So I think it was more frustrating for any owner operator that really, they were having to still pay for any location that they had, so they were still going through the motions of having to deal with, the logistics of owning and operating a business, but, in limbo simply because of, a lawsuit and litigation. So I feel like it was more frustrating for potential licensees.
Yeah, and I do kind of want to take a step back and talk about why the state was doing this to begin with, what the motivation for how it approached the law was. And that was, it's really interesting sitting here right now, 5 years after legalization. The stigma around cannabis is like non-existent at this point. I think it's treated as just a regular part of life now. 6 years, well, to some degree.
Yeah, no, absolutely to some degree.
I don't know.
But I mean,
we're 5 years out of prohibition, Gino, and I think that the state is still in limbo. We still have multiple counties. We have multiple municipalities. We have villages, towns, and cities that they have opted out to have a on-site consumption lounge within their city, town, or village, as well as a retail dispensary. So, the stigma, I definitely think, is still there. We have to do a better job of ensuring that our community is well aware as to why we are choosing to include cannabis in our wellness regimen, as well as ensuring that we're creating a mature and informed community, right? And that starts with education at the foundation. Our government has done a great job with misinformation, and we have to do a better job of ensuring that, New Yorkers have the information that they need in order to make the right decisions.
Yeah, that was like one of those things. Like while I was saying it, I'm remembering that. Like, half the suburbs here, like you can't even open a shop.
Opted out, yeah.
But my point being is that like I think there's a lot of people that kind of forget at this point that 10 years ago there was people still going to jail, to prison for relatively small amounts of cannabis, and 20 years before that, I mean, it was considered a hard street drug that people are doing real prison time, had their lives taken away for something that you can just go into a shop now and buy however much you want to. And I think that's kind of the framework that we have to look at here of when you're building this industry. This was why the state wanted to make sure that, people that were most harmed by criminalization had a seat at the table. But money talks too. Mm-hmm. And I think the big concern has always been, and we talked about this recently, is that large capital can come in and just kind of work its way and bulldoze its ways over those laws. So how do you think we can use education and, let's talk from your platform of to avoid that from happening? And Chad, I'll start with you, and then we can move to Precious.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like education and I know that even at Bloom Rock, this is kind of like what we centered a lot of our different programming, a lot of fundraisers, even a lot of our strategic partnerships off of. It just has to be the core base of everything that we're doing. So what Bloom Rock's doing a lot of recently is trying to branch out into, non-cannabis specific sectors to kind of garner support. Like I said, whether that's from, potential sponsors, strategic partners, other individuals that we can potentially help with some of the services that we're offering in adjacent industries. And I think that whenever we're having this, specific outreach, we're always talking about the education. I think we break it down first in terms of, okay, well, who are we really and what are we representing? When in those two questions, we're getting the point across of, okay, the programming, like you said, we're getting back to the different franchisement of all the most severely harmed individuals from the failed war on drugs. So I think just kind of saying in all that, we have to first, I think, acknowledge the past to then look at the present and look forward to the future. So like I said, in that entire kind of formula, letting them know, yes, cannabis was at one point, XYZ. Cannabis is now XYZ. Moving on into the future, cannabis has the potential to do XYZ. Because I think when you break it down like that, I even know I've been doing a lot of conversation with Precious about how do we really actually get our politicians in, et cetera, to listen to us. We break it down to the economics, right? A lot of the things that we have as legislative priorities are broken down to the economics. How do you see the money moving around in your specific municipality to make you care about what the actual cannabis revenue is doing? And then, kind of going from there, breaking down each kind of different sector of what the cannabis industry actually is and making sure they understand. Because even when, people we've been working with for some time, there's even still just a lot of misinformation and confusion. And even before I finish and pass off to Precious, I would even say that it is no help on what's going on at the federal level, because I think it's confusing a lot of people in terms of, yes, very true, cannabis is still illegal at a federal level. It's still a scheduled substance. But I think with a lot of the movement of potential rescheduling, that hasn't been helpful. And then with, individual states having their own legalization laws, that isn't helpful. Because then when you really start having conversations with individuals, they're like, well, is this even truly a legal substance? And it's like, well, for my state law, yes. But then it's like, technically, can you even cross state lines with it? And it just kind of gets a little bit confusing, which I think some of the misinformation comes from. So which is why I even say following that formula, acknowledging what it was, acknowledging where we are now, and acknowledging what the future of cannabis looks like is, going on repeat the right way to really break down the stigma and get the point across. And then once again, just kind of connecting anything to economics, people are going to listen about the money.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that, Chad. And to add on to that, we're continuously within B.L.O.O.M talking about what does it look like to participate in government, right? How do you remain civically engaged? And I think, utilizing the cannabis industry and the legalization and decriminalization of cannabis within the state of New York is a great example, especially if you are, wanting to be an owner, operator, or a licensee, right? How do you participate in government within the cannabis industry? What does it look like to understand what are the regulations? The regulations might also be considered the rules, right? So for us, within cannabis, within B.L.O.O.M, we are always trying to meet the community where they are, and at the same time, we're always saying, slow things down to speed things up, so that they have a very good understanding as to, how they can participate within the regulated market, understand that, we are really in the business of compliance. We're just selling cannabis, but this is more so about compliance, and at the same time ensuring that they have everything that they need as far as the business acumen to run a legal operated business in a successful way. So, I mean, and to Chad's point, it's definitely about acknowledging the past, celebrating the present in a regulated market, and planning relentlessly in the future. We know that it's not legal federally, right? But understanding what does it look like to operate within your state laws, right? And that goes back to, participating in government, and at the same time understanding, what does it look like to be civically engaged in the entire process. And we're consistently trying to make sure that our entrepreneurs that seek the assistance of B.L.O.O.M via our incubation, they have everything that they need in order to be, successful within the market.
And when we're talking about the market right now, I think we've just spent some time talking about money, and I want to give some scope of like how much money we're talking about here. Last year, New York, in just retail sales, exceeded $2 billion in cannabis. I was looking at some projections through 2033. Grand Market Research sees it going up to $6 billion, higher than $6 billion. I've heard projections all over the board of how much New York's cannabis industry could be worth, but it is. I think it's remiss not to mention how rare it is that a multi-billion-dollar industry opens up for a state effectively overnight, at least legally. The market has always been there, but it is not. It's not been able to be accessed in this way and be formalized in this way that it is now. And I think that, again, if we're going to talk about past harm and the past harms of criminalization, money now flowing in legitimately into state tax dollars, what would you like to see that do to be reinvested into our communities to kind of make a difference from the damage that's already been done from the decades of prohibition?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good question. We consider ourselves proximate leaders from Rochester, looking and aware as to, what's happening on a daily, a weekly, monthly, annual basis within the city. So it's extremely important to understand, what does it look like to be able to provide sound solutions and work with other community-based organizations that are, looking to provide those sound solutions? And so I think at the foundation of that, it goes back to, ensuring that the children, right, our children, the youth, they have everything that they need to be successful. So I think working with, the municipalities that have opted in, as well as our elected officials, our legislators, to ensure that, community-based organizations that, that they're suggesting those sound solutions to provide those programs and services, for the communities most impacted by, the war on drugs. We like to use, really kind words such as disproportionately impacted, but really we were devastated by prohibition, right? And so I think that we could utilize the tax revenue that's generated for community reinvestment in a grand way. We are always looking at B.L.O.O.M Rock to work with other community-based organizations. We never want to work in a silo, right, to provide those sound solutions and programs to the community. So I think it's on a broad scale. I think we're going to need the assistance of municipalities, so like your city councils, your town council, your village council, as well as your, elected leaders and just leaders and competent, caring, kind community members that see themselves, really wanting to provide those solutions. And again, I think those solutions, it's going to be customized, right, based on, what's happening within the community. And I think that those solutions are going to come from proximate leaders, right? And that's why, and we consistently revert back to that within B.L.O.O.M. It's extremely important for us that Rochester, as we continue to come out of prohibition, that, the other municipalities that have chosen to opt out of receiving the tax revenue, that they understand the implications of what it looks like to reinvest into the community by receiving that tax revenue. So, just really wanting to make sure that the community understands the opportunity full spectrum as well.
Yeah, I would definitely echo everything Precious is saying. And, two additional things I wanted to add. One is we actually have a programming portion. It's called our town halls, very kind of simple. We actually have a lot of the conversations like these in terms of, once again, we even kind of dating all the way back. I don't want to go back to the origin story, but Bloom Rock was formed from the Office of Cannabis Management reaching out to organizations that were operating within Rochester, New York, to be technical assistance providers, meaning that we're helping them with the document, large words. Pretty much, we're helping them get applied and get their application. So for us, when we're having these town halls, we're really trying to figure out, okay, that's proximate leadership, right? They reached out to about 70 organizations all across the state. So then going back to the town halls, we're calling out, like Precious said, caring, competent community members to say, within your neighborhood of Brighton, what does this look like? What does this, cannabis tax revenue look like? Within your neighborhood of the Northeast District of the city of Rochester, what does this look like? Where are the gaps at in your communities? How can we identify them? How can we fill them? And honestly, from these conversations, we've had Councilmember Mitch Gruber show up, as well as Senator Jeremy Cooney. So, really just, once again, counter to what Precious was saying, just showing our, at least local electeds, caring enough to actually know this is where the real conversations are happening. So just wanted to put that out there, to invite, if anybody has an idea on, hey, I think this could be a good thing that some of this cannabis tax revenue can go towards, we're opening the doors, to come have the conversation with us so we can make sure the right ears are hearing it. And then secondly, I know, we've been talking about this for a while, like Precious said, the kids 100%, but also I think a decent amount of it needs to be focused on sustainability of our market. I'm sure we're going to talk about it in a little bit. A lot of people are just transparently struggling right now. People are on the verge of closing their doors, which is, one of the most terrible, the saddest things to hear, especially being a lot of these individuals are socioeconomic equity license holders. So I think with this money coming in, there needs to be some sort of allocations to ensuring these licenses can continue to open and continue to operate and continue to sell legalized cannabis. Because if not, like we said, the alternates that looks like big money coming in, buying them out potentially of the hole that they're already in, and then that looks like a completely different, market from the socioeconomic equity market and the ecosystem, at least we've been building in Rochester, New York. So I think within Rochester, I know we've had a lot of, conversations with our council about it. Some of it needs to go towards the sustainability of the current market that we're in, or else, it will look very different in the next 2 to 3 years if we can't keep these individuals' doors open. Like I said, on top of the kids, on top of kind of all the actual community work, I think at least 35 to 40% of that needs to be allocated back to the cannabis industry to ensure that we can keep growing that pot of, tax revenue that we're obtaining from the legalized industry.
And again, the dollar amounts, a comment from YouTube from Mike notes that we're now at $3 billion in sale.
Recently.
And and that's really a fascinating thing because I said $2 billion last year. We're in our fourth month of 20, and we've already got another $1 billion in. That shows like this is a market that is rapidly growing. I'm gonna take a quick call from Robert in Fairport.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. I think the discussion today, I haven't heard a word about an issue like cannabis use disorder. I haven't heard a word about regular users, especially younger users, having cases around depression and schizophrenia and things of that nature. I think we're going to look back at this experiment in legalization and promotion. I got to say, the way city newspaper covers this is promotion of cannabis is going to be a real dark spot. You're only now hearing more about the medical issues associated with cannabis, and I think that it's the tip of the iceberg. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Robert, thank you so much for that. I want to say that, first, I'm not a medical profession. I want to speak from a standpoint of personal experience. So I think you are correct with saying that we're not speaking enough about the misuse of the plant. That is factual. That's an actual thing, right? So I definitely promote healthy consumption and in all things, right? You want to have a healthy balance to maintain that homeostasis. I don't think that cannabis is for everyone. So I'm never or rarely talking about and promoting the consumption of cannabis. We're talking about the business of cannabis, right? And what it looks like to be an owner operator within the market. I definitely do think that we need to be well aware as to, what it looks like for someone to consume responsibly, and at the same time understand what they are consuming. And so I would also say that when it comes to individuals who suffer from mental instabilities, I personally have a sibling who has schizophrenia, and they choose not to consume the plant. So to that point, I would say that cannabis is not for everyone, just like alcoholic beverages and wine and beer and other things is not for everyone. So I think it's also a personal choice. And I think we also need to think about how we, talk about the plant, right? Because it is a plant, and with understanding that, why do we choose to include cannabis into our wellness regimen? For me, there's quite a few reasons for health reasons, pain reasons, as well as to help to relax as well. So I do want to acknowledge that, but I definitely want to say that I'm not a health profession, but at the same time, I'm always talking about the business of cannabis, as well as when it comes to the consumption of cannabis. I think that that's a personal, individual choice, and I think that it's definitely something that should be taken into consideration, as with all things.
Absolutely, yeah. Just like Precious said, definitely appreciate the call, Robert. I think that, even like I said, just going back to the education piece, slowing down to speed up, that is, us as an organization, Bloom Rock, we have certainly touched on that before. I definitely invite you to watch our educational learning experience. It's on YouTube about, what does it look like to be a responsible consumer? And we talked a lot about overconsumption, dosing, just kind of going. What you see in application was what I assume, Robert's referring to. Got a bunch of high school / post-high school kids. They're, hanging out, smoking, blunt after blunt after blunt. And in that specific episode, I know, Precious and I were kind of talking, back and forth, like a setting just like this. Like she said, neither one of us are medical professionals, but just kind of starting to break down that stigma of, okay, this isn't what you need. And, I think that even goes into some of the stigmas in terms of, phrases like pothead and things like that. Whereas like Precious said, a lot of it is used for the actual health portion. But, like I said, we need help as an organization from our municipality, from individuals and partners like WXXI to really get out the word and, what safe consumption looks like and not promoting overconsumption. Because I definitely agree that that's
Absolutely.
not, good / what we're trying to get across by any means.
Yeah, no, I think I should respond to that too, given that you mentioned city, and I write about cannabis or city and have for a long time. I think it's a very, very valid point that there is a concern about safe consumption. And I think the only way you get there is through education and destigmatizing that people, that especially young people aren't afraid to ask questions about what's safe. They're also less susceptible to peer pressure if they know that they can say like, hey, this doesn't work for me, and this does for if that stigma is broken down.
Absolutely.
But I would say too that there's an irony in comments like this that I find somewhat hollow, in the sense that when it comes to reporting about alcohol, this is rarely a conversation that's brought up.
Absolutely.
When it comes to
Because it's been normalized at this point, alcohol. Yeah.
exactly, and if we want to talk about mental health issues in young people, we all have rectangles in our pockets that are linked by research to causing anxiety, depression, feelings of inadequacy, and can lead to severe mental health disorders from being exposed to looking at their phones for too long, to being on social media for too long. We have seen research done on that. Are we doing anything to outlaw phones? There's a lineup of products on every over-the-counter pharmacy that you could pick up and put yourself into a psychosis right now if you wanted to. You could end your life with them if you wanted to. Are we looking to outlaw all those products? Are we looking to end that little social experiment of giving people the trust to pick out what they're selling on a store shelf and trust that they're going to be able to do something responsible with it? So I think the point is extremely valid, that we do need education and we do need to have these conversations about misuse. But when it comes specifically to saying it's reserved to cannabis and that cannabis is an experiment that will one day go away because we realize the harms of it. One, it's not going to go away. It was here long before the MRTA ever passed.
It was, and it will remain here for sure.
And two, if we're going to start doing that, we have to go down a pathway of addressing every single thing that is so normalized in our society that is causing true psychic damage to our children. And or we have to accept that there are risks in the world every day of our lives and that we have to do whatever we can to educate and mitigate them. There's two choices you have there. Seal everyone up in a box and let them live in safety, or teach them about the world and what works and what doesn't work.
Absolutely.
So that would be my thoughts on that.
I definitely agree.
So to move forward on that, when you're working with cannabis entrepreneurs right now, what need for help right now is most profound? Break? We're going to take our first break of the hour. We'll come back and we'll talk about what are some of the needs of cannabis entrepreneurs right now.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Bob Johnson Auto Group, believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. Proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, focused on the news, issues, and trends that shape the lives of listeners in the Rochester and Finger Lakes regions. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com.
And we're back on Connections with the folks from Bloom Rock talking about the cannabis industry right now. Before we went on the break, I was just starting to ask about your work with cannabis entrepreneurs right now, dispensary owners, farmers, people that are entering the industry right now. What is the need 5 years on from legalization that is most profound right now? What is when you're talking to folks and you're doing programs, what are people seeking right now in terms of support?
Yeah, absolutely. I would honestly start at a broad scale, and I know Precious will probably go into some of the more finite things, but we've like I said, technical assistance providing. That was essentially that was us consulting for these different cannabis license holders, and then in an extent that was even kind of beyond of our current scope / capabilities. But once again, I know we've even shared this with WXXI, shared this with you. That's just kind of who we are as individuals, and we've created the network that if people are going to reach out to us asking for any sort of assistance or guidance or direction, although the proper resources to allocate to that might not be there, we're going to do anything that we can within, Chad's power, within Precious's power, to make sure that they are getting the help that they need. Saying all that to say, the kind of we obviously didn't coin the term, but we've been calling it CE, continued education, because that's, essentially what it is, right? It's like a lot of the individuals that we help come through the pipeline, with their application, help them with deficiencies, help them kind of get into the place they are. And then they're like, okay, that's great. Now I've been open for a year and a half, 3 years. Now what? Like, I'm battling marketing. I'm battling, just different products. I'm battling compliance issues. I'm battling, the ever-changing legislative landscape of the cannabis industry. So now I think, and like I said, going in at a high level and kind of letting Precious get to some of those details, I feel like we're still kind of doing the same thing, as we're just helping these people out with anything that looks like, from this portion of their business all the way down to this portion of their business. And sometimes that's even assisting them and helping get connections and do things like this, helping them get coverage for their specific dispensary, there's specific situation and, media and marketing help. So like I said, in a very broad sense, we're doing continued education, which is, back down to the consulting thing, helping them continuously move forward and progress through their adult use license that, they hold in whether that's retail, cultivation, processing, distro, or micro business specifically.
Yeah, Precious, anything to add there?
To add on to exactly as Chad said, I mean, we are really supporting them with the continuing education. And I would definitely say, Gino, it's more so of the operations of that license, right? So if, we are supporting a licensee that has a, retail dispensary, what does it look like to operate daily, weekly, monthly, annually from a compliant aspect, right? We are always, training and all licensees that we are in the business of compliance, and we want to make sure that the employees, your bud tenders, as well as, anyone that might be operating in direct fulfillment, every aspect of the business, they have a great understanding of that. So to Chad's point, and it's a great question, Gino, how are we continuing to support them, and what we're seeing? It really is that continuing education. It's not a cookie cutter experience, right? It's more so, it's a customized engagement based off of, what the licensee might need. I myself, as well as Chad and Dr. Brandy Hester Harrell, our strategic advisor, we're always going in and ensuring that, each licensee, especially from our incubation and cohort, if they're reaching out to us and they're needing that additional support, we are able to give them. If we don't have that direct answer, we're always, ensuring that, those resources are there for them, even if, the allocation of compensation in dollars is not there.
What's the next frontier? I think right now we're kind of at this point where dispensaries there's well over 600 in the state right now. They're kind of well established. We still don't have on-site consumption though, and I think answering my own question a little bit, but I think that's still a little ways off. But I want you to talk a bit about like lobbying for that measure in the cannabis industry that still has to go through some hurdles to get there, and what do you think that would bring to the marketplace here? Chad, you could start with that.
Yeah, I think the next frontier looks like, just like kind of anything else, what's the next innovative thing, right? So let's think about some of, I know we hear stories about the cannabis cafes in California, or, even more specifically not in the United States. I think, as like you said, these, delivery still has to officially release on-site consumption, nursery license. I think once those are out, it's going to come down to, okay, like you said, we're doing nothing but growing as an industry in terms of like the scale of license holders in each kind of specific available license at this time. The next thing it's going to be is, okay, how can I stand apart from everybody else? So, we hope to see, I know we're always talking about the bud and breakfast, idea that, Precious has been wanting to do for a very long time. The, cannabis cafes, the, cannabis movie theaters. So I think that's what it's going to be, because at the end of the day, like you said, this industry has been around for a very, very, very long time. Also not going anywhere for probably a very, very, very long time, even if it ever does. So I think it's going to be, once again, hate to always bring it back to the economics, but okay, operationally, I'm doing well. Now, how do I stand out economically? What can I do to go that extra mile to make people want to specifically, engage with my brand, or specifically come to my store, or specifically want to be a part of, whatever that specifically looks like, whether, like I said, cultivation, processor, micro, et cetera, et cetera. Like I said, and I would definitely pass it to Precious to see what she's thinking on that.
Yeah, Precious, do you have anything to add there?
Guys, you're breaking up. Hello?
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you now. I'm sorry. Say it again.
We were talking about the on-site consumption and kind of like the next frontiers of the cannabis industry, and want to get some of your sense of what you think some of the things are that will be, major players in the next iteration of some of the growth in the cannabis industry.
Yeah. So, Gino, like I mentioned before, I've been doing this for 25 plus years within, distribution and, operating in logistics and the previous market, right, allegedly. And so As I transitioned to the regulated market, we created a company called EEWC, Entertaining and Educating with Cannabis, Entertaining and Elevating with Cannabis, in the hopes of, securing a on-site consumption license. The idea was to create this safe, sophisticated space for our community to relate, relax, recover from the stress of the day via a bud and breakfast in upstate New York, because I have beautiful memories of upstate New York, and my family is from upstate New York, well over 100 plus years within this region. And, as we have continued to roll out of prohibition, the hopes of, on-site consumption, it's still there, right? So I think that the next iteration and this, what the market will look like is creating something that's sustainable, and as far as sustainable for the community, and what it looks like to to operate intentionally and engage the plant in an intentional way, and really create those ecosystems where we're educating the community, where we're operating throughout the supply chain, and welcoming the general public and consumers to a cannabis farm, a cultivation site. Going through and understanding, what does processing look like? What does manufacturing look like within the industry, and really opening up the doors for our community so that they can understand, what we're doing. We are plant pioneers, where there's nothing legacy about. We're not legacy leaders, right? We're plant pioneers, and we're forging through, and we really have an opportunity to really create a sustainable market that is inclusive to the general public, but in a way that is intentional, that includes them, and we're explaining the harms of prohibition, and acknowledging the harms of prohibition, and planning intentionally, for a market that will be sustainable.
So when we talk about sustainability, too, as I mentioned before, there's over 600 dispensaries in the state right now, and I think that number is probably going to increase quite a bit. Yep. But is there a concern of when we're going to hit a saturation point? That I'm looking from the WXXI studio, there's probably about 4 or 5 dispensaries within a reasonable walking distance. They're not too far from here. Is there a concern about, okay, how do we, get ready for the point of like, okay, the industry has hit its kind of plateau level of that. Now we have to support it in maintaining that level rather than keep trying to add on more and more and more dispensaries that will ultimately close because they can't all be sustained by a market. There is going to be an upward threshold limit at some point. So I just want to get both your thoughts on that, of like how you kind of push for the sustainability in the marketplace by looking at where it could be and where's a reasonable place to consider it has leveled off. And Precious, I'll start with you on that, of how do you approach that kind of idea of that kind of sustainability overall?
Well, within B.L.O.O.M, in order for us to be able to provide technical assistance, we do what we call cannabis canvassing. And so, Gino, I'm well aware and tapped into the community, and understanding the individuals that are still operating in an illicit way. They want to apply for a dispensary license, or they want to apply for an on-site consumption license. Let's think about our bud and breakfasts, our cannabis and coffee shops or cafe shops, right? But that portal or that license isn't open right now. And so those individuals, past and present, they're still making hundreds of thousands of dollars monthly, right? So the illicit market is at, I would estimate, maybe $15 billion, okay? So when we say, is there saturation, for me, absolutely not. If you see yourself as wanting to be a contender in the regulated market, you should have the same opportunity and access as anyone else. I do not subscribe to or even understand when someone says that the market is saturated. For me, that's a greedy individual. That's someone who doesn't want to give someone else an opportunity because, maybe you want to ensure that, and this is hypothetically speaking, just anyone might have an opportunity to have 10, 20 plus stores or retail locations. So I don't see where there isn't saturation in the market right now. We've only been out of prohibition for 5 years.
Yeah, it's almost like Precious took the words out of my mouth. I definitely agree, and I think that just kind of even going back to some of my previous points, barriers to accessibility. One, like Precious said, for the actual operators, I think as we kind of continue to go on throughout the market, the state will realize what does it look like to pull a lot of these, operators still operating, let's call it in the gray, into the market. And I think, with those operators operating in the gray, we've, like you said, Gino, we just did $3 billion in sales, and I don't even know if 50% of the actual population of New York State is purchasing cannabis from retail dispensaries. So, as we start to pull in a lot of those, plant pioneer operators that are currently operating outside of the legal industry in the gray market, I think along with that, we'll bring in a lot of their shoppers, which will kind of, like Precious was saying, circumvent the quote unquote saturation that we might potentially be seeing. But if anything, we're only seeing it because not everybody's buying cannabis that consumes cannabis. And I feel like that's just kind of the very easy, simple to understand fact. There's still a lot of individuals that, have been going to the same individual for the last 5-10 years. Why would you switch, right?
Exactly.
It's trusted. You know where it's coming from. Let's say they have a little indoor cultivation, home cultivation, whatever that looks like, whatever their logistical operation looks like to get the plant from wherever they're getting it into your system. I think that as we start to focus on bringing in the current operator outside of just kind of, scrambling for anybody that we can in such an early industry, then, like I said, the operators will see the value in it beyond what we're telling them, hearing it from the state. And then, their shoppers will start to follow too. And, just kind of, I don't want to say weeding out the gray market because, the gray market's always going to be there just because of, certain policies around the world, around this nation. There's always going to be a reason to have a gray market operator until we kind of see changes that I would even go as far to say the international level to, because at the end of the day, we operate on an international economy, even if it's not directly, represented in the micro that you live in, the macro outward facing, as we're seeing now. I don't want to get too much off topic, but, gas is still $4.
Yeah.
Gas is still $4 a gallon. And, that's looking at the macro economy as a whole. So like I said, just kind of reiterating everything Precious said, but also, as we start to focus more on the people that we actually want to target and, pulling some of their shoppers from the gray market to the legalized market, I think that'll, like I said, circumvent any, quote unquote, saturation that we're experiencing.
And we got a few minutes left here, so I just kind of wanted to look forward as far as lobbying goes. And we look at state, county, city governments of what you think are, key legislative priorities for the cannabis industry right now. Precious, I'll start with you, and we got a few minutes left, so whatever you have.
Gino, I am having a very hard time with hearing you all. It sounds very distorted. I heard you say, Precious, I'll start with you.
So I was asking what some key lobbying priorities are for what you think state, local, and city governments could be doing to help support the cannabis industry right now.
Okay, I think I heard you say key lobbying priorities. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, perfect. The number one that I could think of, so most recently, B.L.O.O.M, we did a lobbying day within Albany, very successful lobbying. We appreciate our legislators that were able to meet with us. We do feel that, our concerns were heard. And hopefully, fairly soon implemented. And so I would say the number one would be that we're looking for the MRTA, Marijuana Regulation Taxation Act, to be implemented as it was written. That would be the thing, right? I think that the state agency has an implementation issue, definitely a high turnover, but implementation. if we look at the foundation as to saying, what could we do better? The individuals that have been devastated by prohibition. My community has been devastated by the prohibition of a plant, mass incarceration, families torn apart, and so many other things. We need the law to be implemented as it was written. We are hoping that our legislators and our local municipalities that have opted in, that they continue to see the efforts of the community-based organizations such as Bloom Rock. We are working relentlessly to ensure that our community is well aware of the opportunities of working in a regulated market, right? We are fearless operators, continuously, reaching out to individuals that are operating in an illicit way and enticing them to, want to operate in a regulated market. And what does that look like to provide them with technical assistance and the resources that they need in order to be contenders and successful. And so, we are hoping that our legislators, and as far as lobbying, like I said, the implementation of the MRTA as it was written, those individuals that are, social economic equity applicants, right? That would be, minorities, women, disserviced veterans, as well as, distressed farmers and disabled veterans, women, minorities, individuals living in CDIs from 1981 to 2021. What does it look like to be of a resource for them? So we're really hoping that our legislators and at a local level, our city councils, mayors, and individuals that have opted in to receive the tax revenue, they're working with us and not against us.
All right, great. Yeah, that just about ends it up for us.
Absolutely.
So, Chad and Precious, thank you both for being here. This has been great. And remiss not to mention, too, check out the article in City this month about the work that B.L.O.O.M's doing. And, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gino.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.